Englishwoman Rachel Fulstow went on a date with a man named Liam Smith in York in 2019. The couple had intercourse at a hotel and they went for lunch the following day, but the relationship never went further. In 2021, Fulstow started dating Michael Hillier, a man in his late 30s who was involved in a large-scale cannabis operation. He reportedly didn't like the fact that Fulstow had done a one-night stand with Smith, whom he didn't know. The woman convinced Hillier in graphic detail that the man had abused her. That aspect, however, was never confirmed. Evidence indicated that from that point on, over the course of 10 months, the couple jointly planned to murder Smith. Hillier would later tell a court, "We decided to deal with the matter ourselves and seek justice ourselves and go down the vigilante route." He cited as a motivating factor the statistic that only 1.6% of assault and abuse cases make it to court. Hillier would also state that Fulstow saw him as kind of like her knight in shining armor after they'd begun planning the killing. Fulstow researched Smith on the internet while her boyfriend bought firearms online and practiced shooting in his cellar. On November the 2nd of 2022, Hillier carried out reconnaissance at Smith's home in the village of Shelvington, Greater Manchester. The cloned license plate on his Mitsubishi Shogun with the number R22ORA would become instrumental in the investigation that followed, as it was captured on CCTV. Hillier returned to the address a few weeks later on November the 24th. On that day, Fulstow had reportedly packed her boyfriend a lunchbox with food supplies as well as hydration tablets, headache tablets, and diazepam. Hillier waited in his vehicle for 10 hours for Smith to return and was captured on CCTV outside his home. He'd gone near the house because he was unsure his target was inside. Upon spotting Smith, he returned to the Shogun, which 38-year-old Smith approached shortly afterward. Hillier opened the door and confronted him over the alleged abuse, later telling the court, "He knew exactly what I was talking about." Hillier then blasted the man in the face with a shotgun before pouring sulfuric acid and soda crystals on his body. He and Fulstow then took a 2-week vacation to Jamaica. As the investigation progressed, South Yorkshire police contacted their Manchester colleagues and revealed they'd stopped a vehicle 3 weeks before Smith's killing that had the R22ORA plates inside. The information ultimately led the police to Hillier. Upon their return to the UK, he and Fulstow were successively arrested for murder in January and February of 2023. The woman would claim that she'd only found out about the killing after it had been committed and claimed she was petrified to go to the police. However, the evidence, coupled with Hillier's reports of the fact that she'd changed her story multiple times, made her account unreliable. Investigators determined that her role was not only to conduct online research on the victim, but also to provide Hillier with an alibi and source the corrosive substances used on the body. Adding to the flimsiness of her denial were disturbing photos showing the couple enjoying their holiday and laughing as they were riding horses in the Caribbean Sea in the killing's aftermath. In August of 2023, the couple were found guilty of murder, with Fulstow also being found guilty of perverting the course of justice. Outbursts from the victim's family and the public gallery resulted in the pair being called monsters and told to rot in hell. Hillier was jailed for life and would serve at least 33 years, while Fulstow was given a minimum term of 30 years. Number 6. Richard Paul Warner. In 2017, Australian man Richard Paul Warner, at the time in his early 40s, took it upon himself to become a hunter of men, looking to have inappropriate contact with minors. The Adelaide man was reportedly fueled by personal trauma he'd suffered as a child. He would lure the men with fake profiles and then conduct citizen arrests. Warner provided videos of the confrontations to a YouTube channel without concealing his targets' identities. As per South Australian law, the identity of people charged with such offences was not to be publicly released until they pleaded guilty or were committed to stand trial. In one of the confrontations, Warner was shown roughing up a man by grabbing his shirt. While reporting on his operations, the father of one wore a superhero-style mask. He was eventually arrested by the police on charges of aggravated assault, 2 counts of using a carriage service to menace, harass or cause offense, and 1 count of publishing the identity of a person charged with being an offender. Detective Chief Inspector Wayne Overmeyer had stern words for the vigilante's actions, insisting for the public to let the police do their job and not take the law into your own hands in relation to any criminal matter. In November of 2018, Warner pleaded guilty to using a carriage service in a harassing or offensive way. He ultimately avoided jail and was placed on a $200 good behavior bond for 12 months. Standing outside the courthouse in January of 2019, Warner told the media that it was up to the public to decide if his actions were criminal, stating, "When the law is wrong, I think the right thing is to stick by your conscience." Number 5. Adam White. In February of 2019, career criminals Taylor Benford and Ryan Paul, both aged 23, in his 4x4 Mercedes. During the pursuit, Benford and Paul were thrown from the motorcycle. They sustained serious injuries, including a fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, and broken bones. White would claim he'd lost control of his vehicle when coming round the bend, but the police believed he'd intentionally run the duo off the road. He was arrested on the spot on suspicion of causing grief. Benford and Paul were asked to voluntarily attend interviews at the police station. They subsequently pleaded guilty to attempted burglary at Luton Crown Court and were given suspended sentences and 200 hours of community service. White, who unlike the duo had no prior convictions, was given a 22-month jail sentence at the same court, with a judge telling him he shouldn't have taken the law into his own hands. The case attracted considerable attention after being featured in an episode of 24 Hours in Police Custody. Many viewers were outraged over what they perceived as a grave miscarriage of justice, with some describing the sentencing disparity as blood-boiling and sickening, with another user contending the justice system is an absolute joke. After being jailed in February, 34-year-old White was released with an ankle monitor. Lindsay's pregnancy, while under mounting financial pressure, there was an outpouring of public support for the man in the aftermath, and by early December of 2022, a GoFundMe entitled "Give Adam White Justice" had raised over $160,000 in less than a week. Number 4. Charlie Fowler. 28-year-old Indiana woman Charlie Fowler was arrested in the summer of 2018 following an incident at the Diamond and Nail Spa in Valparaiso. Fowler, a children's therapist, was reportedly dissatisfied with her $30 manicure. She refused an offer to have the work redone and left without paying. As employees were calling the police, the woman got into her white BMW and tried to leave. Salon worker Thi Hung Nguyen then ran after her vehicle. He clung to the hood and was dragged for about 40 feet through the parking lot. When the officers arrived at the scene, Nguyen complained of pain to his hand and leg, but officers reported no visible injuries on him. Fowler claimed that she'd intended to wait for the police in her car but decided to drive off because nail salon employees had begun banging on her window. She was arrested and charged with criminal recklessness and misdemeanor theft for not paying the manicure fee. The former charge was dropped, however, after the police reviewed surveillance footage from the lot. Number 3. Patrick Drum. On June the 22nd of 2012, Washington man Patrick Drum went to the home of 28-year-old Gary Lee Blanton in rural Sequim, Washington. Drum gunned down Blanton and returned the following day to execute his housemate, 57-year-old Jerry Wayne Ray. Blanton had been convicted in 2001 for having consensual intercourse with a high school freshman while he was a senior. Ray had been jailed in 2002 for having had relations with 2 minors. The men were each registered as level 2 offenders, which entailed that the state believed they presented a moderate risk of recidivism. In the aftermath of the double murder, it would emerge that Blanton's wife had received a text from Drum, a man with whom her husband had been friends for 8 years, saying that they'd gone camping. The text made Drum, who lived in the same neighborhood as his victims, the primary suspect, and a manhunt was launched. The police subsequently found his abandoned rental car with a note that included an apology and a full confession. Drum, who had a tattoo that read "Win Some" on his right forearm and one that spelled "Lose Some" on the left, was taken into custody after a few hours. He readily confessed to the arresting officers that killing the 2 men was something that had to be done, while also admitting that he'd been planning on driving to another county and killing a 3rd offender. The murders drew mixed reaction from the locals, some of whom regarded Drum as a hero and others that saw him as a cold-blooded murderer. His supporters were reported to have begun harassing the families of his victims. Drum pleaded guilty to the murders in July of 2012. During a final statement before his sentencing, the man claimed that he'd never intended to hurt his victims' families, calling them collateral damage and asking his supporters to leave them alone. While referring to Blanton and Ray, Drum contended their actions speak louder than words. He was handed down 2 life sentences without parole, plus several years for burglary and unlawful possession of a weapon by a felon. Today's topic was requested by Vasilinia. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Melissa Rodriguez. On June the 1st of 2023, a Florida woman was arrested on multiple charges after she'd cyberstalked and assaulted her ex-boyfriend, whose name wasn't disclosed by Broward County law enforcement. The man had broken up with 21-year-old Melissa Rodriguez in late 2022 and blocked her on all social media platforms, in addition to instructing his cell phone provider to restrict texts and calls from unknown numbers. In February, Rodriguez trespassed into the gated Monarch Station community in Coconut Creek looking for her ex and was banned from returning on the premises. Over the months that followed, she continued calling him from different phones, but the man refused to communicate with her. Enraged by the perceived injustice, Rodriguez decided to dish out her own brand of punishment. On May the 29th, the young woman snuck into the community and approached her ex as he was getting into his vehicle. She prevented him from closing the driver's side door and sprayed an unknown substance into his eyes. The attack, which Rodriguez had likely carried out with pepper spray, left the victim with extreme burning, severe redness, irritation, and a temporary loss of vision. His injuries were treated by a team from Coconut Creek Fire Rescue. After the victim shared his story with responding police, Rodriguez was arrested at her place of employment, the Hard Rock Hollywood Hotel, and taken to the county jail. We're lining up our earlier release on when cover-ups go wrong, right after number 1. Stay tuned if you'd like. Number 1. Luis Salvador Rodriguez. In the spring of 2015, following an impromptu trial, angry locals from villages in the Banos del Inca district of South Peru punished a man they suspected of stealing their sheep. After roughly 80 sheep had disappeared, villagers narrowed their amateur investigation down to 20-year-old Luis Salvador Rodriguez. Upon being apprehended, the latter claimed he wasn't to blame and that he'd been working for a gang led by a taxi driver calling himself Colorado. The name was familiar to locals, but Vigilante Patricio Villa-Gallardo later told the media that it made no difference, concluding that since they'd caught Rodriguez, he was the man who would be punished. Sheep were a vital resource for the villagers' survival, and they perceived the thefts as an attack on their livelihood. A self-appointed court was put together that quickly found Rodriguez guilty. The villagers dragged the man outside, bound him, stripped him of his top, and took turns whipping him with a piece of birch. Photos of the punishment later surfaced on social media, and some users voiced their support, with one writing, "Very well done. Beating him in front of everyone is a good punishment. Maybe that'll teach him." The police subsequently launched an investigation into the matter and publicly condemned the villagers' vigilante behavior. Number 6. David Anthony. Good morning. Tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. That means I have to stay here for at least 2 weeks. That was the text message received by many of 51-year-old Gretchen Anthony's friends and family on March the 23rd of 2020. Over the next few days, additional texts from Gretchen's number described how her condition was worsening, which had prompted her to admit herself to the emergency room at the Jupiter Medical Center in Florida. After several more days of concerning texts and fruitless attempts to reach the woman by phone, the family contacted the police and requested a welfare check. Officers discovered that the security cameras had been ripped from the walls inside Gretchen's residence. After reaching out to the security service provider, investigators obtained copies of the camera's recordings from the day she'd last been seen. The video showed a man lying in wait on Gretchen's patio. Around the same time, a neighbor claimed to have heard a woman let out a blood-curdling scream. The police ultimately identified Gretchen's estranged husband, David, from whom she'd filed for divorce just weeks before her disappearance, as a person of interest in the case. After a manhunt spanning roughly 2,000 miles, David was located in New Mexico, where he was taken into custody on suspicion of kidnapping and murdering his wife. He was also accused of sending the deceptive text messages from her phone in an attempt to cover his tracks. In December of 2020, the authorities reached an agreement with David, which stipulated that he would plead guilty to second-degree murder and reveal the location of Gretchen's yet unfound remains in exchange for a lighter sentence. He subsequently led police to the body, abandoned in a patch of grass behind a Walmart just a few miles from her house. The following January, David was sentenced to 38 years behind bars for the crime. Number 5. Luis Romero. Texas woman Maria Marquez Santiago, a mother of 3, was found dead inside her pickup truck at 8520 LaPorte Freeway near Lawndale Street in Houston on November the 21st of 2018. Local police described how the vehicle had been parked off the side of the road in a grassy area near some bushes. Her cell phone was tracked down to an apartment complex where she'd reportedly gone to put an end to her affair with 36-year-old Luis Moron Romero. A few hours after Santiago's arrival, Romero emerged from his apartment with her body wrapped up in a roll of carpet. He then abandoned her vehicle in the vacant lot and left the scene. A few days later, Houston police presented Romero with the damning surveillance footage of his attempted cover-up, at which point he confessed to the murder. Shortly after his subsequent arrest, local authorities received a tip about his alleged involvement in a previous murder with a similar cover-up. In February of 2017, the body of 56-year-old Guillermo Gonzalez had been found in his car at an abandoned car wash near Romero's apartment. The latter's DNA was detected in the mixture taken from the crime scene, and he was thus handed down a second murder charge. In the summer of 2022, Romero was convicted of both crimes and subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. Number 4. Jan Purple. At about 10 p.m. on November the 16th of 2018, a vehicle crashed into a light pole on Barnett Highway near Texaco Drive in Burnaby, British Columbia. When first responders arrived at the scene, they came upon 2 passengers, a man and a woman, with the latter reported as being in critical condition after having been thrust into a ditch 30 feet from the car. She was rushed to the hospital where she was ultimately pronounced dead. The police immediately suspected foul play, as the female victim, identified as 34-year-old Nicole Porciello, presented with extensive stabbing wounds. The man, 31-year-old Jan Popel, was identified as the victim's on-again, off-again boyfriend. According to the testimony of family members, the couple had broken things off about a month prior to the deadly incident, leading investigators to theorize that the car crash had been the end result of some sort of domestic dispute. In the end, it was determined that on the night in question, Popel had attacked his ex in a jealous rage. After stabbing Porciello 47 times, the man crashed their car into the light pole in an attempt to make her death appear accidental. Porciello, who worked as a special education teaching assistant at Templeton Secondary School in Vancouver, was reportedly survived by a 10-year-old son. A disturbing video recorded in the moments immediately following the stabbing was shown during the ensuing court proceedings. The clip, which many of the victims' relatives refrained from watching, showed Popel taunting the woman, who was covered in blood, and begging for him to spare her life. He ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Number 3. Alex Siman. On the night of December the 1st of 2014, Australian police were called to a home in the Melbourne suburb of Brunswick East after receiving reports of a shooting. Eyewitness Tony Cannan told investigators that he'd arrived at the bungalow belonging to friend Alex Seman and his family to find the latter high on methamphetamine and holding a gun. When asked why he was wielding a weapon, Seman allegedly said, "I want to kill everyone." A short time later, family friend Michael Bekazi arrived at the home and went into the courtyard. Seman subsequently pointed the gun at Bekazi's head while Cannan looked on in disbelief. He then waved the firearm in the direction of his neighbors, who were taking out the trash, before pointing it back at Bekazi and pulling the trigger at point-blank range. Following the shooting, which killed the victim instantly, Seman retreated back into his house along with his girlfriend, Megan Beljulji, and sister Hannah. A tense 5-hour standoff ensued as the police attempted to gain access to the residence, while Seman, Beljulji, and Hannah refused to surrender. When officers finally entered the house in the early hours of the following morning, the 3 occupants presented a carefully fabricated cover story about how an unidentified intruder had attempted to rob Bekazi before gunning him down. Investigators reportedly found additional bullet holes intentionally placed by the conspirators near the crime scene, which would appear to corroborate their story. The false narrative was rejected, however, and all 3 subsequently faced criminal charges. Seman was sentenced to 18 years in prison in connection to the drug-fueled shooting, while Beljulji and Hannah were jailed for at least 2 years for attempting to cover up the crime. Number 2. Ian Bennett. The lifeless body of 38-year-old Kerry Woolley was found in the bedroom of her flat in the English town of Solihull on the afternoon of July 12th of 2020. The mother of 2 reportedly presented with 54 sharp force wounds, the majority of which were concentrated on her neck. There were also signs that she'd been strangled. West Midlands police had been notified of the grisly crime scene by the victim's boyfriend, 38-year-old Ian Bennett, who claimed to have come upon her body already in its mutilated state. Investigators reviewed text messages exchanged between Bennett and Woolley, which indicated that the couple had had a falling out days prior to the latter's death. The man had reportedly accused the victim of cheating on him, which the police labeled a groundless allegation. CCTV footage showed a car belonging to Bennett's 63-year-old mother, Linda, driving to a canal bridge where the latter then exited her vehicle and tossed an item into the water. Investigators used dashcam footage from Linda's car to prove that the item she discarded was actually the knife used to fatally stab Woolley. Bennett was thus taken into custody on suspicion of murder, while his mother was also arrested for helping him cover up the crime. Following a 16-day trial at Birmingham Crown Court, the man was found guilty and jailed for a minimum of 25 years. Linda was likewise convicted, leading to a 3-year prison sentence of her own. Number 1. Elliot Turner. 20-year-old Elliot Turner was arrested for murdering his girlfriend, Emily Longley, in a jealous rage at his parents' house in Bournemouth, Dorset, England, on May the 7th of 2011. The 17-year-old victim, a native New Zealander, was fatally strangled while lying next to Turner in bed. When he was being taken into custody, the young man reportedly said, "I never meant to harm her. I just defended myself." Turner maintained his innocence and was subsequently released on bail, at which point Dorset police covertly installed surveillance devices at his parents' home on Queenswood Avenue. The police reportedly obtained 23 separate audio recordings in which Turner's parents openly discussed how they destroyed a letter the young man had penned confessing the murder. They were also accused of removing vital evidence from the murder scene prior to the arrival of police. Although the legal defense team argued that the damning audio clips had been recorded illegally, they ultimately proved to be a substantial part of the prosecution's case. In court, it was detailed how Turner had a history of obsessive and controlling behavior towards women, including Longley, an aspiring model, whom he'd baselessly accused of unfaithfulness. Following a 4-week trial, Turner was convicted of murder and sentenced to life, with the possibility of early release after serving 16 years. Both of his parents were jailed for 27 months for their roles in the subsequent cover-up. Thanks for watching. If you could have a superhero on speed dial, who would you choose? Let us know in the comments section below.